Hey everybody, we made it to season 23, which has no theme, so it's kind of a free-for-all. So hit like, subscribe, leave a comment, do whatever you want, just be safe. Blood ties turned deadly in the peaceful citrus groves of Indian River County, Florida. The quiet communities nestled along the Atlantic coast became hunting grounds for two men bound by family and savage desires. Not only was one a trusted auxiliary deputy with the local sheriff's department, but the other was his cousin. The relatives unleashed a wave of terror that would earn them the moniker the Killing Cousins. This is Monsters. Before we begin, I just want to make sure you know that my other show, Sinister, is back up and there are 3 episodes a week. They're dark stories from history, and if you like this show, you'll probably like that one. Give it a shot. There are links in the description. Thanks. David Allen Gore was born on August 21, 1953 in Florida. His childhood wasn't marred by physical abuse like many people who turn into evil monsters, but he did suffer from persistent illnesses. When he was a toddler, he fell into a hill of fire ants and was bitten around his head and face. He developed a high fever, and his family said he wasn't the same afterward. It's been reported that, as a child, his mother would sit him on her lap and read him Bible verses in only her underwear, which might have triggered some form of conflict in his mind. David became close to his cousin Fred Waterfield after learning that they both had a sexual dark side as teenagers. That shouldn't have been surprising, as Fred showed many signs of a budding killer. Born on September 29, 1952 in New Jersey, he was known to have slaughtered and mutilated farm hogs without reason, savagely beat his dog with a metal pipe, and spiraled into patterns of substance abuse. The cousins would talk about sexually assaulting and even murdering young women. They eventually escalated to peeping on girls in the locker room of their high school gym class. Soon after, Fred sexually assaulted his cousin, David's sister. Not only did David not protect his little sister, he held her down while the assault took place. David's first job ended in disgrace when management discovered he had drilled a peephole between restrooms at the gas station where he worked. Sexual violence consumed the cousins' thoughts during their teenage years. Fred's father, absorbed in his work at NASA, remained largely absent. That lack of supervision created a perfect breeding ground for their twisted alliance. David married his first wife, Donna, in 1974 when he was 21 years old. They had a son together within a year and then divorced. David married another woman in 1975. Fred had married his wife a few years prior and already had 2 children. Despite having partners, their sexual sadism was not satisfied by the traditional marriages. Their partnership grew more calculated with each passing year, and what began as shared fantasies evolved into a grotesque business arrangement. On June 23, 1976, Diane Smalley was driving her new Chevy to Lake Wales when she heard pops and felt that her tire was flat. She pulled over, and immediately David and Fred pulled up next to her and offered her assistance. Once out of the car, she felt a gun in her ribs and was pushed into the back seat of her own vehicle. Fortunately, another car appeared, and Diane flung herself out of her car and into the road. The couple driving that vehicle stopped while David and Fred drove away. It was later learned that one of the men had shot out her tire. Diane reported the incident to the police but hadn't gotten their license plate number. It wasn't until years later that she would connect the attack to the Killing Cousins. It was only a month later, on July 22nd, that David and Fred got the opportunity to carry out another attack. Angela Hommel went to her car to go to work but noticed she had a flat tire. It would later be revealed that the tire had been slashed. She called Fred because he had been a friend of her ex-husband, and he came to her house and offered to give her a ride to work. He told her he knew a shortcut and drove through some orange groves where he eventually claimed the car was stuck. He told Angela to wait in the car while he went for help, and soon he returned with David. Fred pulled a snub-nosed .22 caliber revolver out of the glove compartment and pointed it at her head. Then the cousins took turns sexually assaulting her. When they were finished, they pulled out a knife and threatened to kill her and feed her to the alligators. Instead, they made her promise not to tell anyone, and they agreed to let her go. But Angela did tell someone. She went to the hospital and reported the attack. When David and Fred were arrested, they insisted the sex was consensual, and despite the bruises on Angela's body, they believed the men. They made Angela take a polygraph and told her it showed she was lying. Then the authorities told her that if she tried to move forward, she would be prosecuted for perjury and that Fred and David would sue her for slander. This is one of the reasons many women don't report sexual assault, because they're violated a second time by being treated like this by the authorities. It was later reported that she voluntarily dropped the charges because she was too embarrassed, to which Angela responded, quote, "This is not true. Where did they get this? I see it quoted all over the internet. I never dropped the charges. If anyone should be embarrassed, it should be the sheriff's department and the DA for not prosecuting Fred and Dave for my rape. I believe 6 innocent women would be alive today if the sheriff and DA had done their job in 1976, and I hold them culpable for the abduction, rape, and the death of 6 women that we know of. Sadly, there may be more deaths that we don't know." That would only be the beginning of the failures of the Indian River County Sheriff's Office, though, as they ended up giving David his deadliest weapon in early 1981. A simple badge transformed the predator into something far more dangerous: a wolf in lawman's clothing. In the years after the attack of Angela Hommel, David divorced his second wife and remarried his first wife. They had another son in 1981, around the time David became an auxiliary deputy. During the day, he helped his father tend citrus groves, while darkness brought the power of his auxiliary deputy's badge. That dual existence created the perfect hunting ground. It was at that time Fred saw the dark potential, offering David $1,000 for each victim secured through his newfound authority. They developed a system where David would do the hunting, using his position as an auxiliary deputy to find targets. Once a target was selected, Fred lurked in the shadows waiting for his cousin's signal. That was their arrangement on February 19, 1981, when Ying Hua Ling, who was 17, stepped off her school bus into David's carefully laid trap. One flash of official credentials eased her suspicions and sealed her fate. The Ling family had immigrated to the U.S. from Taiwan, and Ying was a high-achieving student at Vero Beach High School. David had been stalking the girl for a few weeks and knew her family's routine. Her father worked nights and left the house hours before she got home from school, and it seemed that he thought her mother would also be gone. David used his badge to get Ying into his car and then took her to her house, expecting it to be empty. When he found her mother, Shang Wangling, still home, he told her that she needed to go with her daughter to the police station. He drove them out to a citrus grove where he sexually assaulted both victims while he waited for Fred to arrive. Once there, Fred tied Shang to a tree, but the way he tied her made the rope tighten around her neck as she struggled, and she slowly strangled to death. After Fred sexually assaulted Ying, David killed her. Then he dismembered both bodies and put them in steel drums that he buried on the citrus grove. When the Ling's young son arrived home after school, the door was open and the house was empty. When nobody returned that evening, he went to a neighbor's house and they called the police. Shang and Ying were reported as missing persons, and their fate would not be discovered for years. On July 15, 1981, Julie Daly had been in Vero Beach visiting her family with her 2 teenage daughters when David spotted her at Round Island Park. She had dropped her daughters off at a more popular beach spot and then went to the park to have some quiet time. After she left her car, David disabled it and then waited for her to return. Fred had told David to find him a blonde, and at $1,000 a pop, David was happy to oblige. When Judy's car wouldn't start, David was right there, auxiliary badge in hand, ready to offer her a ride to a payphone. Once she was in his car, he pulled out his gun and handcuffed her. He drove her out to the orchard where he met Fred, and they both sexually assaulted the woman. Then David killed her, dismembered her, and buried her just like he had with the Lings. Then David called Judy's family and told them she was having car trouble and wouldn't be able to pick up her daughters from the beach. Judy's sister and brother-in-law drove to the park, and when they found her car, they found the coil wire had been disconnected. It was clear that her car had been intentionally disabled, so they called the police. Detective Tom White was assigned to the case, and he got 2 tips that both identified David Gore. One person had seen him at Round Island Park that day, and someone else had seen him using a payphone around the time Judy's family had been called, and that witness said it looked like he had blood on his clothes. David was questioned, and he said he had just been at the park that day looking at the waves. When authorities searched his vehicle, they found 2 blonde hairs that ended up being matched to hairs from Judy's hairbrush, but the district attorney said he couldn't file charges without a body. David got a lawyer, and the investigation stalled. The close call did nothing to slow David down. He attempted to secure another victim just a week after the murder of Judy Daly. Despite not actually having the authority to pull vehicles over, he did anyway, and this time it was 18-year-old Dana Sturgis. He questioned the woman about a fake robbery and told her that her vehicle had been involved in the crime. He convinced her to follow him down the road to a place where he could take a better look at her car. Once down the road, they were spotted by a fisherman, so David abandoned his plan and let her go. Dana told her parents about the incident, and her father called the sheriff's office and made a complaint. Dana picked David out of a photo lineup, and he was questioned about the supposed traffic stop. He wasn't able to explain why he even stopped her, let alone why he hadn't documented the stop or why he had led her down a secluded road. David was fired from the sheriff's department and had his badge and uniform taken away. Without his badge to lure women, it seemed David took a new tactic and was hiding in the back seat of a woman's car, waiting for his moment to strike. Fortunately for her, she saw his head in the back seat before she got into the car. Marilyn Owens was leaving a doctor's appointment when she saw someone in the back seat of her car, and she screamed. A sheriff's deputy was also leaving the building at the same time, so he ran over and caught David in the back seat of her car, with his shirt off, a bottle of alcohol in his hand, a handgun, a pair of handcuffs, and a police scanner. David was arrested and convicted of armed trespassing. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. While David served his time, Detective White tried to find evidence that he was responsible for the disappearances of both Judy Daly and Shang and Ying Ling. He interviewed Fred, who acted shocked that his cousin had been found hiding in the backseat of someone's car. By then, David had separated from his third wife, which was actually his second marriage to his first wife, and when they interviewed her, she told the investigator that he had come home one night with blood on his shirt, but he claimed it was from hunting. Then she told him that their dog had pulled 2 bras out of the back of his truck that did not belong to her. She said that, after she saw them, David shoved her into the truck and drove her out to an orange grove where he started a backhoe and sat in it for a few minutes before turning it off and driving them home. She believed he was considering killing her but changed his mind. When they searched his vehicle again, they found hairs that linked him to the Lings, but without bodies, the DA was still unwilling to issue an arrest warrant. Still, White went out to the orange grove and did some digging, but never found anything. David was released on parole in March of 1983 after serving less than 2 years. Detective White watched and waited, sensing the growing darkness. He kept constant surveillance on David, who was living with his parents at the time. Unfortunately, the surveillance was noticed by members of the Gore family, and David's mother complained to Governor Bob Graham's office, and White's supervisor ordered him to stand down. White was furious that they were going to allow David to go unobserved, but there was nothing he could do. 2 months after his release, David attempted to abduct a sex worker at gunpoint with Fred in Orlando, but she got away. The same day, the cousins spotted 2 14-year-old girls in the area outside of a 7-Eleven convenience store. Barbara Byer and Angelica LaValle were planning to go to the beach, but they needed a ride, so they decided to hitchhike. David and Fred stopped and picked them up, but instead of taking them to the beach, David drove around in his van while Fred sexually assaulted the girls. Then they stopped somewhere so David could take part in the assault before he shot them both in the head. Their remains were dumped in the woods. Barbara and Angelica's families waited for them to return home that day, but they never did. They became missing persons, and 7 months would pass before they knew what had happened to their daughters. 2 months later, on July 26, 1983, 17-year-old Lynn Elliott and 14-year-old Regan Martin were spending time at the beach near Lynn's house, but they decided they wanted to go to another beach about 10 miles or 16 kilometers north. Lynn's car was in the shop, so they made the fateful decision to hitchhike and were unfortunate enough to be picked up by David and Fred. Once in the vehicle, David asked if the girls wanted to go smoke a joint with them, and the girls happily agreed. David's parents were out of town, so the men took the girls there, but while they were driving there, Fred's sister passed them in another car, and he was worried that she had seen Lynn and Regan in the car with them. Once at David's parents' house, Fred left to go talk to his sister and see if she knew anything. While he was gone, David tied up each girl in a different room and sexually assaulted both of them. When he was finished with Regan, he went back into the room where he had left Lynn, but she was gone. Lynn had gotten free and ran out of the back door of the house. David ran after her and saw her running down the road. He fired a shot over her head and yelled for her to stop, but she wouldn't. When Lynn tripped, it gave David the chance to catch up, and he started dragging the girl back towards his parents' house. She continued struggling, and finally David pushed her to the ground and shot her twice in the head, killing her. It was at that moment that 15-year-old Michael Rock was riding by on his bicycle, and he witnessed the execution. He raced home and told his mother what had happened. Their call to police triggered a 90-minute standoff at David's parents' house. Before police arrived, David put Lynn's body in the trunk of his parents' car and then went inside and put Regan in the attic. He told her that he would kill her if she made a sound. Then he used a police scanner to listen for the inevitable report. He called 911 himself and reported the same crime, but gave the dispatcher a different address in an attempt to throw the authorities off. It didn't really work, and soon police were on the scene and David was refusing to come out of the house. Officers on the scene saw a trail of blood leading to the trunk of the car in the driveway, and when they opened it, they found Lynn's body. After 90 minutes of negotiation, police stormed the house and David surrendered. They found Regan alive in the attic. Detectives were not surprised that David continued his crimes after being released from prison, but then Regan told the officers that there was another man with David when she and Lynn were abducted. They went to Fred's auto repair shop and placed him under arrest. After his arrest, David admitted to kidnapping Lynn Elliott and chasing her down the street, but he wouldn't admit to killing her, despite being seen. He eventually asked for a lawyer. He did end up telling investigators that he and Fred were working on buying a house in the middle of the woods to turn it into their quote-unquote lair. The house would have been the perfect place to carry out the torture, sexual assault, and execution of countless women without anyone knowing. Luckily, they were caught before that could happen. David's trial was set for December of 1983, and only days before it began, he confessed to the other murders that detectives had suspected he had carried out. The DA agreed not to seek the death penalty for the new cases if he helped them recover the remains. In the middle of December, David led police to a citrus grove in Vero Beach where the remains of Barbara Byer were found. After more digging, the barrels containing Shang and Ying Ling were found. They were only about 6 feet away from where Detective White had searched while David was in prison. David meticulously laid out the details of each murder, openly implicating Fred in all of the crimes. David said he disposed of Angelica Lavallee's remains in a canal off of I-95 and they have never been found. When the trial started, David originally claimed that Fred had murdered all of the victims, but he eventually changed his story and admitted to having killed all 6 of them, saying Fred was only an accomplice. David's mental state revealed itself during his trial. He spoke of dual personalities and demonic possession, yet his prison letters told a different story. Those communications exposed his true nature as he described his crimes as, quote, perfect experiences. Criminal experts later identified their allegiance as a classic killer-team dynamic. Each cousin fed the other's dark impulses, creating a perfect storm of violence. David's voyeuristic tendencies paired with Fred's history of animal torture represented textbook warning signs. Those indicators, voyeurism, substance abuse, and early sadistic behavior, now serve as red flags for law enforcement and psychologists studying violent offenders. Though David had been given a deal for all of the new crimes he confessed to, he was still eligible for the death penalty for his original charges for the kidnapping, rape, and murder of Lynn Elliott and the kidnapping and rape of Regan Martin. Regan testified, as did Michael Rock. On top of that, Angela Hommel had seen David's arrest on the news and she contacted the DA and also testified against the defendant. David's own father testified that the gun used to kill Lynn had belonged to him and that his son had access to it. In March of 1984, David Gore was found guilty of 1 count of first-degree murder, 2 counts of kidnapping, and 3 counts of sexual battery. He was sentenced to death. Fred always claimed he was completely innocent and that his cousin was trying to frame him. Why David wanted to frame him was unclear since David had admitted to committing all of the murders. Regan testified against him and David was also supposed to testify, but he had started acting crazy in prison, claiming he was talking to God, so the DA opted not to call him to the stand. In that trial, Fred was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Then he went on trial for the murders of Barbara Byer and Angelica Lavallee, which the DA had more physical evidence showing he was involved. He was found guilty of those murders and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. 28 years passed before lethal chemicals claimed David's life on April 12, 2012. Final words of remorse fell on deaf ears as Lynn Elliott's family watched justice delivered. Fred remains in prison, still pleading innocence and pointing fingers at his cousin. There have been other victims of sexual assault who have come forward since David and Fred were sent to prison. The daughter of one of Fred's neighbors told her mother of the assault that happened before the murders. David also wrote many letters to prison pen pals describing details that didn't match any of their known victims. We'll never know whether he was telling the truth or embellishing his stories. For 2 people who had such a strong urge to make others suffer, it's hard to imagine they only killed the 6 victims that are known. When people turn into monsters who cannot control their urge to kill, their body count rises pretty quickly, and there are likely far more victims of the killing cousins than we'll ever know about. Thanks so much for letting me tell you this story. If you're a fan of true crime, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss an episode. You can also hit like or leave a comment. If you'd like to support the show, check out our merchandise at thisismonsters.com. The link is in the description. Thanks again, and be safe.